Well, welcome to the 92nd episode of Women on Wealth. I'm Jelena Ogilvy, and today we are going to discuss the legal essentials in real estate. And I think this is going to be a powerful conversation. One, because the majority of us do tend to be homeowners. I think the study from 2024 is that 65% of us are homeowners. But what I found disturbing was the American Bar Association found that one in five real estate transactions face a legal dispute. So, to help guide us through this, I'm thrilled to have Corinne Abbott, who is an attorney at Grassette Associates here in Connecticut with us. She received her undergrad degree from Quinnipiac University and then her law degree from Quinnipiac University School of Law. It is good to see you, and I would love to kick it off by asking you a little bit about your background and how you came to do what you're doing today.
That's an interesting story for me. So I actually, the very beginning was on my 16th birthday, I wanted a job. And one of my friends at the time, had been working at a law firm in the town that I grew up in. She'd been there for 2 years and she decided, not 2 years, 2 weeks, and decided she didn't want to do that.
Oh, wow.
I knew he was, I knew he was looking for somebody, so I reached out and I started working for him. My first day of my employment was my 16th birthday. And I worked for him for 7 years, all through college, right up until I was going to start law school. And he did real estate. So I wound up doing a good chunk of his real estate. And this was 2000 to 2007. So there's a lot of industry changes at the time that I got to see, at 18, 19 years old. And then fast forward undergraduate, like you said, at Quinnipiac University, took a year off in between, also worked in real estate, then went back to law school at Quinnipiac, got my degree. And when I got out of law school, it was 2010.
Mm.
And our commencement speech focused on how the employment market had tanked.
Yep.
So I had a skill to fall back on already. I already knew how to do real estate from having done it as a kid, basically.
Yeah.
And I reached a few contests and I wound up at a firm in Connecticut that's no longer in practice, but had a lot of exposure to a lot of real estate transactions and really cut my teeth. And then in 2014, myself and my now partner, Beth Grassette, we were leaving that previous firm. And after a few martinis, decided to open Grassette Associates. And it was nice because I got to choose to do real estate for the first time in my life. Every other time it kind of just was
Mm.
put upon me.
Yeah.
And we got to choose to do that. And by doing that, we decided to focus solely on real estate. So a lot of firms in the state, because real estate does this, right? It goes up and down with the market,
Oh,
and it
yeah.
can be a scary practice area for attorneys. So we decided basically white glove service because too many attorneys treat real estate as pocket change. They
Yes.
kind of do it on the side, and that's all we do.
Yeah.
So we just celebrated 10 years basically, right? Last year. So we're still cooking with gas. So that's the short version of how I got to where I am.
Well, it's one of the things I loved about when we first met is you reiterated that, and I think it's incredibly important. And I also love that, to make such a pivotal change with your career, sometimes it may just take a martini. So, or two. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. So I'm going to start with one of the broadest questions that I probably can, and then maybe we can kind of narrow down a little bit. But what would you say are some of the most prevalent misconceptions that homeowners have when it comes to purchasing real estate?
On my end as an attorney, I'm going to try not to speak for realtors, even though I work with a lot of realtors and I
Yep,
have a lot of realtor friends because we wind up becoming friends, which I value.
sure.
I'm going to try to stick to just speaking for attorneys, but I think one of the biggest misconceptions that homebuyers will have is that they've signed a contract and that's it. Now it's binding. There's not going to be any changes.
Yeah,
And far too often, I have to counsel people that, while you have that binding contract and the law is there to protect you,
yeah.
if somebody decides to behave badly, your recourse is going to be to go to court.
Hmm.
And that takes time and money and is probably not going to effectuate your goals.
Right.
So that's definitely one of the uphill battles where people often say, but they signed a contract, but they already agreed to do
Yeah.
X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, yes, you are 100% correct.
Yeah.
Now you have to enforce that.
And do you have any examples of that you can talk about?
Well, just in general, all right.
Yeah.
So in general, contract law,
Yeah.
when a buyer and a seller sign a contract, the buyer's exposure is their deposit. So whether they put down $1,000 or $5,000 or $50,000, whatever the case may be, that is their total exposure. So if the buyer were to breach the contract and not purchase the property, they
Mhm.
might potentially forfeit that deposit. Okay.
Right.
If a seller breaches a contract, so let's say a seller signs to sell to buyer, and then they decide, you know what, we can't find anything else. We love our house. We're not leaving.
Yeah.
The buyer's recourse is something called specific performance. And that's where they can go to court because land is such a unique thing to contract over. You
Mm.
can't make the same land twice. That buyers have the right to go to court and force something called specific performance, where the seller will, you can force the seller to sell them the property under the contract. And that is a very basic example of a seller behaving badly, right? So that's great that they have a contract in place saying that the seller has to sell,
Yeah.
but if the seller just decides to breach the contract, it's not as easy. I mean, sometimes people think that I have magic powers, and it's just not as easy for me to force them to do it. You have to take them to court. It's going to take you a year or two
Wow.
to get in front of a judge and get your ruling. Now, on a smaller scale, let's say we have a transaction. Early on in the transaction, the seller agrees to repair something. They
Mhm.
put it in writing, they sign it. They say, we're going to remediate radon, or we're going to repair a well or fix the roof.
Yeah.
We get right before closing, and the seller did not do that thing, or they did it in a poor manner,
Sure.
right? What's the buyer's recourse? They can they have a few options. They can decide to close anyway and take the property the way that it is, even though the seller didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Right.
They can refuse to close and argue about it,
Hmm.
which ultimately you could find yourself in litigation, which again doesn't really effectuate their goal. If we're talking about somebody who's got their bags ready and they're excited and their loan,
Mm.
and now what is their option? Wait a year to get a
Right.
ruling?
Right.
So oftentimes I will say I find buyers in a position where they want the house more than they want to be right.
Okay.
And they
Yeah.
wind up taking something that they shouldn't be obligated to, but that is unfortunately where we are in a seller's market.
Yeah. And I have to imagine the first scenario occurring fairly often, but even the first situation you mentioned about the seller deciding not to sell the house because they can't find another home. I mean, again, if there's a low supply market, I'm sure that can be very prevalent. So,
It happens, and then it's
yeah.
going to be a battle of the wills, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
if the buyer has the stomach to, which I wish they would do it more. If the buyer has the stomach and the means to go to court and force that
Mhm.
performance, it actually helps me as a real estate attorney. The
Yeah.
problem is we don't have a lot of case law on the books for these types of scenarios because people wind up reaching an agreement because either one side or the other is desperate to get it done
Right.
or doesn't want to wait or doesn't want the hassle and walks away. So, unfortunately, when I'm presented with these situations, I don't have the case law as the cudgel to force and say,
Sure.
this is what's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, most people wind up settling.
I'm sure most people don't want to be patient about it and take the time. So,
No, not
no,
at all.
that's interesting. Thank you. And so last year, I believe just over 25% of home buyers were first-time home buyers. So, can you talk about common mistakes that a first-time home buyer can make and maybe ways to avoid it?
Well, two come to mind immediately. Number one is waiving home inspections. And ever
Really?
since COVID,
Yeah.
we see, yeah, we see buyers waiving them so that they will be the successful offer because we have low inventory, especially Connecticut. Connecticut
Okay.
is one of
Yeah.
the I saw something, I don't know how true it is, you see something online that Connecticut had the some of the lowest inventory in the country. We
Mm,
we don't have enough doors for the people who want them,
right.
right? So I see buyers waiving their home inspections to be a competitive offer so that the seller picks them. And as a first-time home buyer, that scares me because you probably don't have a ton of money in reserves in case something goes wrong. This is your first house, you've been saving up to buy it. Now you
Absolutely.
didn't do a home inspection. You have no idea that the furnace is about to kick the bucket. You have no idea that the roof is at the end of its useful life.
Yes.
And even if people are insistent on waiving their inspections to be uh, an attractive offer to the seller, I still will ask them, okay, is there a septic or a well at the property? Those are, you cannot live in the property. Those are health and safety issues.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Wow. Interesting. And I can't imagine how many, to your point about first-time home buyers being prepared financially, right? Understanding what true costs of a house can possibly be. That's a big one. Okay.
yeah.
And you have another one you said?
Oh, I was going to say, and I just circled back to what I said at the beginning about us being a boutique firm that, we handle real estate primarily,
Yeah.
is that we find buyers, they want to go with their friend's uncle who said they'll take care of them, but their friend's uncle does primarily bankruptcy or does
Mhm.
personal injury, or they're a really good litigator.
Yes.
You don't want a litigator as your real estate attorney because for the most part, it's a friendly transaction. The seller wants to sell, the buyer wants to buy.
Yeah.
You don't want somebody who's going to go in there off the bat. I'm not saying that I'm not aggressive when I need to,
Right.
but you don't want somebody who just comes in there with this, beating their chest attitude and winds up killing the deal. Also, those attorneys, they typically wind up charging a bit more than, say, a firm like ours would because it's not something they do on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting because it's also true on the reverse end, where I had a conversation with a real estate agent recently that was trying to prepare her estate planning documents, and her instinct was to go to the real estate attorney in town that she knew. So it's, yeah, you got to stick in your lane.
Well, when attorneys first, the profession of being a lawyer has been around forever, and for hundreds of years, you would hang your shingle,
Yeah.
take whatever came in the door. You figure it out, you do it, you stick to your town. And in today's digital age and with people moving all over the place, I had a statistic the other day and it doesn't come to mind, but we put a crazy amount of new laws on the books every year.
Yeah.
It is not physically possible for me to know all the ones in real estate and in bankruptcy and in personal injury and still be able to provide my clients with good service. So the second mistake that I think especially first-time home buyers make is they will go with, an attorney that they know because they feel comfortable that they know them rather than somebody where that's all they do.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think that that's a really great point. Thank you. So let's talk about RESPA. This is something that was enacted back in the 70s that kind of impacts sort of transparency when it comes to real estate transactions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so RESPA has a lot of facets to it, and I don't think people realize how old it is when they talk about it now. I'm glad you said it's from the 70s because people tend to think, oh, RESPA, that's something new.
Yeah.
It's just been, remodeled and revamped along the way.
To the point of changes.
One, yeah, yeah, well, yeah. One of the biggest things that RESPA did a few things. What it did is it wanted to make it so that lenders have to provide timely disclosures to borrowers. And that is so important because what you don't want is you don't want it to be your closing day, whether it be a purchase or a refinance, and you get the final figures and you find out, oh, you have to bring $5,000 more to closing than you thought.
Right.
And now you feel over a barrel. So part of what RESPA tried to do is say that, lenders need to disclose final figures within a certain amount of time before closing to kind of take some of that stress and pressure and uncertainty
Yeah.
away from the borrowers, which is a good thing.
Good.
The other interesting thing that RESPA did, especially in my world, is it prohibits kickbacks, right? So
Hmm.
when I first started, like I mentioned, as a kid in real estate, um, companies could give out gifts, right? They would say, hey, let me send you to that concert at Mohegan. Here's 2 tickets.
Yeah.
Let me send you on a vacation. I remember, I think I was maybe 17 and I went on a free ski trip to Okemo because you could do that,
Oh, my
right?
mountain. Yeah.
So, and it was a great powder day too. We had, I think, like
Uh,
14 inches overnight. I'll never forget it.
that's not
But
common recently. Keep going.
I know. But now part of what RESPA it tried to prohibit that, right? So in other words, if you have a good referral source and you're looking to do something like that, you have to go with them.
Mhm. Oh,
And you would think, well, how does that stop people? It does.
okay.
Because now if I have to go to dinner with that person, or I have to, I have to go, I have to take them out, or we have to do it together. And
Hmm.
I know that recently, and by recently, I mean in the eyes of the law, which can be a long time,
Yeah.
recently, RESPA is trying to catch up with social media and marketing in that manner, what you can and cannot do. So as an attorney, we're trying to, always make sure that we are not doing something that we shouldn't be doing in
Mm.
terms of marketing. And we have to comply with the Connecticut Bar Association too, which requires certain disclosures on advertisements and things of that nature.
Okay. Yeah. So there's regulation both on a federal and state level.
Which is a good thing, right? I don't want somebody sending all of their business to somebody simply because they paid for a trip for them to go to Tahiti, right?
Absolutely.
You want it to be based on something, good service and a working relationship, not necessarily who buys you things. So I think RESPA did a good job in trying to hone that in.
Well, and I find it so fascinating because that was very common when I got into the financial industry in the 90s. It's same exact thing, and that's changed dramatically since then. So, and very
Yes.
interesting. How can people how can people hold title specifically in Connecticut since we just brought up state level?
So in Connecticut, there are two ways that people can hold title. So if you're an individual, you don't need a designation, right? But let's say you have more than one person on your title,
Hmm.
whether it be a significant other and yourself, or husband and wife, or maybe you're on title with your parents. There's two ways. It's either joint tenants with the rights of survivorship
Hmm.
or tenants in common.
Okay.
Now, joint tenants with the rights of survivorship means if one of the parties on title dies, their interest in the property automatically transfers to the surviving title holder. Most married couples want it that way, obviously, right? They're yes, this is my spouse. I get people who are a little leery when they're not married and they don't know necessarily the direction it's going to go, right?
Fair.
Because anybody on title has a right to your property. They are part owner. They have to join in for any sale. They have to join in for any refinance. If they have any outstanding certain types of medical debt or whatnot, it can be attached to your property. So it's a big deal to add somebody to title.
Sure.
The second way is tenants in common.
Okay. Yep.
And what that means is if, let's say, two people hold title, one person dies, their interest goes in accordance with statutory probate law, right? So their interest is either going to go to their beneficiaries at law under intestacy statutes in Connecticut, meaning they didn't have a will, or they're going to pass under their will. The
Okay.
moral of the story is it may or may not be the other title holder.
Right. Okay. But I think it's important to know, and I asked about Connecticut specifically because every state has different ways to hold title, and it's important to know what your options are when you make these decisions.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And those are the two for Connecticut. Um, Joint tenants is pretty common across the country
Yeah.
as being an option, but then there are some variations.
Yep. Absolutely. That's great. And how can buyers ensure that they're compliant with the current real estate laws when they're making a transaction?
Well, you have to use trusted professionals because at the end of the day, I applaud buyers who make themselves well informed. They do their research,
Mhm.
but they can't know all of it. I mean, the same way I can spend my time looking up healthy things to eat and how to take care of myself. But, having some kind of wellness coach or a doctor, they are professionals, right? So
Yeah.
I would say, number one, they have to do their due diligence in who they're hiring. So that's great that somebody gave you a recommendation, and I know the process seems overwhelming, but do your due diligence, right? Look up that entity's reviews. How long have they been in business? Have other people heard of them?
Hmm.
If you're looking up a lawyer, you can see if they've been grieved on the Connecticut Judicial website. If you're looking up a realtor or a lender, you want to really pay attention to those reviews.
Okay.
And I heard this one time and it absolutely makes sense to me. While a 5-star review is fantastic, something like a 4.8 or a 4.9, it probably means that your reviews are more realistic. Because there's always going to be somebody who didn't understand something
Right.
and writes a negative review. But when you have 1,000 5-star reviews, you have to question how genuine are those reviews.
Yeah.
So I would say number one, I definitely think people should do their due diligence in every way possible in choosing those professionals. And then Use people who specialize or focus in what it is that you need.
Okay.
So I'm not begrudging anybody, trying to make an income, but for example, when you're going to pick a home inspector, you want to make sure that
Yes.
they know what they're doing, and you have to really do your online research to make sure.
Okay. That's great. And maybe a quick follow-up question, Corinne. If they interview someone, are there some specific questions that you recommend they ask?
Well, I'll give you the attorney perspective, right?
Yep.
Because that's me. If I were interviewing an attorney for a real estate transaction, I would ask them, how available are you
Mm,
to answer my questions? Because real estate is fast-paced and detail-oriented, unlike
yes.
other practice areas. My friends who practice in insurance or personal injury, med malpractice, bankruptcy, whatever the case may be, they'll have a file for 1, 2, 3, 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
My exposure with a client is 60 days.
Yeah.
So things move pretty fast. I would ask them, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Am I going to be dealing primarily with you or your paralegal?
Okay.
Do I have direct access to you?
Mm,
Where can we close? Right. So I tend to get a lot of pushback. Our office is located in Brantford, Connecticut, and people will say, "Oh, well, you're in Brantford. My closing is in Oxford, or my closing is in Cromwell."
hmm.
And okay, no problem. I have an office I use in Rocky Hill. I have an office I use in Stamford. I have an office I use in Trumbull. So make sure you ask an attorney, are they flexible? Because the closing day may be chaotic. So are they flexible in terms of meeting with you for closing?
Yeah.
Obviously, people naturally want to ask about cost, but I wouldn't let that be their driving factor. I do see that a lot too. They're
Okay.
looking to, I always say this phrase wrong, but what is it? Pound wise, penny foolish. I always say it
Yes.
backwards.
That sounds right to me.
I think that's right.
Yeah. I'll know when I
But
go back and listen to the recording.
I will sometimes get people who, they'll tell me, okay, well, the attorney down the street was $25 cheaper.
Right.
Okay. I mean, this is all we do. And the attorney down the street, I'm just saying, randomly, this
Yeah.
attorney down the street, they're $25 cheaper, but they do five other things and they're never
Exactly.
in the office.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't focus too much on cost. Obviously, you don't want it to be, $3,000 that you weren't expecting. But
Sure.
I think we do get some buyers or borrowers for refinances who focus on that, I think, a little too much.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No,
Sure.
you need to kind of balance out. I love the range of questions and how to balance that out. So,
Yeah.
yeah, great. And I guess what role does a real estate attorney play in preventing legal issues during a home purchase? I know you've talked about this a little bit already, but if you have any other comments on that.
If there is, so typically in Connecticut, unless it's Fairfield County, which is a 50-50 there, when I get a file, there's already a signed contract. So a lot of the times there's not too much wiggle room for me to change anything, but I
Okay.
monitor. I mean, a lot of attorneys don't do this, but our firm does monitor contingency dates in the contract. We
Okay.
want to make sure we know that the realtors are on the road. They're showing houses, they're booking appointments. And we want to make sure that the buyer is not going to blow a date in the contract.
Okay.
So we, as at least our firm as real estate attorneys, we make sure that, the buyers stay on track, that they don't um, unnecessarily subject themselves to litigation, right?
Okay.
By reviewing every contract and, making sure that we're organized. And I know I'm getting away from generalization of real estate attorneys in the market and how they prevent things, but I would just say having a real estate attorney involved sooner rather than later, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. We're there if you need us,
Yeah.
and if you don't, that's great. I always tell clients, I'm like your doctor. The less we have to talk, probably the better your transaction is going.
Yeah.
But I'm here for if things go wrong or need to be fixed, or we need to draft some legal language for, an ancillary agreement between the parties.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
attorneys are definitely we're more there as the
Preventer?
what?
Preventer? Is that a fair word?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can also be the enforcer if we need to be, to the
Yes.
best of our abilities within the
Okay.
law, right?
Yep.
But I'd say first and foremost, it's we're trying to prevent people from having to get to litigation. So you had mentioned a statistic about 1 in every 5 transactions ends
Mhm.
up in a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And I hadn't heard that before, but I'm thinking about it, and I think that would be fairly accurate. In one part of the transaction or other, or maybe even post-closing, we find out that the seller committed fraud by lying about the condition of the property. I see that all the time too.
Mm.
So I'd say 1 in 5 is probably a fair assessment. Somewhere along the way, there's either litigation or somebody threatens it.
Yeah.
Um, so having real estate attorneys who know what they're doing and can kind of look out for buyers along the way, I think can help prevent,
Okay.
that 20% of people.
And if this is fair to ask, when you started answering the question, you mentioned outside of Fairfield County. How are they a little bit more unique or different?
So in the rest of the state, typically a buyer submits an offer, and it's an offer,
Yeah.
but they're putting it on a contract. So the realtor typically will drop an offer and they send it over to the seller, and the seller gets, today's market 10, 30, 40 offers.
Hmm.
And let's say they pick yours. The seller puts pen to paper, signs it. It is now a binding contract,
Okay.
absent contingencies that may or may not be in there. In Fairfield County, I'd say 60 to 65% of the time, the buyer's agent submits what's called a binder. And it is a basic memorandum of terms, purchase price, loan amount, parties' names, anticipated closing date, maybe the attorney's information. And then if the seller accepts their binder, their offer, typically, and there's a school of thought out there, this can go either way. So this is very general advice, but if there is an intent by the parties to sign a superseding contract, it negates that original document from being a contract.
Okay.
So, because the parties are signing intending to sign what's called an attorney drafted contract, which they're
Mhm.
drafted by attorneys in Fairfield County, we do it all the time. It's like a 15-page contract. Um, because of course attorneys are extra wordy. I'm proving that today. Um, you do your binder, then you do your home inspections, you figure out if you're going to agree on any repairs or credits, and then you sign the binding contract. So Fairfield's a little bit different in
Wow.
that sense.
Okay. Well, and I mean, selfishly, I live in Fairfield County, so I had to ask the question. However, I do think it's fascinating that you have two different procedures within the state of Connecticut, right? It can
There
be
are, yeah, last
maybe
time I
more.
checked, there's 30 something
Okay.
contracts floating around out there that people use on a regular basis. So, which makes my job a lot of fun because every time I get a file, I won't just look at it and say, oh, I assume. I look at every single contract every time because I just don't know. We don't have one standard Connecticut contract.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And any specific considerations that women might need to know in terms of navigating this market?
I don't know if there's I'm trying to think if there's anything specific to women. I
And
think just having the confidence to hold your own because
okay.
you shouldn't feel like you're doing the same thing everybody else does. So if a man is buying a house or you're buying a house, there is no difference.
Hmm.
So don't feel like there is, if you feel that somebody is treating you differently or you think that they're talking down to you because you're a woman, which typically happens, just speak up because there's no reason for you to think that,
Hmm.
you buying a house should be any different than a man buying a house.
Have you found that in your career?
Not so much the independent individual, but I have seen
Couples?
couples
Hmm.
where
Okay.
I know the woman wants to ask questions and I know they want to feel like they're equally part of it, and their significant other doesn't necessarily seem to feel the same way.
Okay. Yep.
So, yeah,
I find that in my career as well. So thank you
I
for
bet.
Mhm. Last question. Any advice that you can give someone that's looking to invest in real estate in today's market?
Invest or just like to hold as an investment?
Or purchase. So yeah, I should edit that. Yeah,
I mean, the advice I'm going to give is the same for both.
perfect.
Um, Number one, selfishly, hire a real estate attorney sooner rather than later.
Yep.
It typically for real estate attorneys, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I can tell you, a lot of other offices that I work with do primarily real estate. You can call them. It's not going to cost you money up front to have a conversation. So don't be afraid to make that call, and have somebody ready, because once you have your offer accepted, things are going to move really fast. And one of the things you don't want to do is now be trying to find an attorney. So just have that done in advance so you know who you're going to use. And number two, I'm sure people have heard it all over social media, but it is true. Don't wait for the rates to be something else.
Yeah.
We have no idea what's going to happen. And if I'm being honest, and maybe people won't like this because we all got spoiled with COVID and our 3% mortgages, but 6.5 or 7% to borrow $350,000, $400,000 really isn't unreasonable, right? We all hear those stories where people bought their first house in the 70s at 18%.
Right. Right.
That's a lot of money. And even though I know people are, don't get me wrong, I know people are struggling to afford to buy houses. As the kids say, if the maths, right? So if the numbers work for you and you need a place to live, you're
Yes.
doing one of two things. You're living with family, and you know what they say about that, starts to smell after a certain amount of days. Um, and or you're renting, which means you're just throwing your money away. Where so if the numbers work for you and you find a house that you want to buy, don't wait thinking that rates are going to come down because of something in the market that may or may not happen 3-4 months from now. Buy
Mhm.
the house if the numbers work for you.
Yeah. And that's known as recency bias in terms of comparing today's figures relative to where we were with COVID. It's, and we're not going back there, I don't
No.
think. So we'll see.
What is it called?
Recency bias, comparing.
Recency bias.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Corinne, thank you so much. I have to say, I love ending these conversations knowing that I personally gained information that I wasn't prepared to learn. So we appreciate it. And if people want to find you, where can they look?
Well, I mean, our website is the name of our firm. It's rather long, but it's www.grissetteandassociates.com.
I
And Grissette
mispronounced
is,
that earlier. Sorry.
I didn't think you did,
Oh, did I
but
not? Okay, good. Let's keep going.
oh, you're good.
Spell it.
No, but it's spelled Grassette, in case anybody wants to find us. You can call us with the at our office number that's listed on there. And I think we also have you can submit a question if you're looking for a real estate attorney. So we pride ourselves on making ourselves available, and because that's the name of the game in real estate.
No, absolutely. I was a big believer in sort of the white glove service that you talked about when we first met, but after the conversation we had, it just kind of, I think, enhances that need even more. So I appreciate it.
Of course, this was fun.
Thank you.